Welcome to the Federal Low Code Trailblazers podcast. This is season 2, episode 2, part of the ATARC Federal IT newscast. This episode will focus on low code and DevSecOps. My name is Bill Bunce, and I am an enterprise account executive with Pegasystems and the industry chair for the ATARC Low Code Working Group, which is a subset of the ATARC DevOps technology pillar. We should first define for our listeners, what is low code and why are we discussing it together with DevSecOps? Low code platforms provide a factory approach, and Tracy may debate this later, but provide a factory approach used to collaborate, innovate, and deliver critical applications from one inclusive environment using a graphical user interface instead of traditional hand-coded computer programming. So what is DevOps? DevOps refers to a union of people, processes, and tools to achieve building, testing, and releasing software more frequently and more reliable. What is DevSecOps? Short for Development Security and Operations. DevSecOps automates and integrates security at every phase of the software development lifecycle, from initial design through integration, testing, deployment, and software delivery. Our goal with this podcast is to meet with government and industry leaders who are leveraging low code on real projects to understand the challenges they had to overcome and the benefits they're realizing. Our guests this month are Tracy Bannon from MITRE and Alex Sutherland from Liberty IT Solutions, a Booz Allen company. Welcome, Tracy and Alex.
Hey, hello there. Thank you for the invite. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Bill. Good to be here.
If I could ask each of you just to introduce yourself and to share your relationship with low code as well as DevSecOps. Tracy, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure, you bet. So Trace Bannon, I am a software architect. I'm an engineer, all around code nerd. One of the areas that I focus on is modern software engineering and harnessing new capabilities and whatever those needs are for the ecosystem. So ultimately my job is solve really complex problems with software in a secure and expedient way. How's low code and no code fit into that? It's another tool. It's another arrow. What do they say? Arrow in the quiver. So my introduction to working with low code and no code actually goes back to the early days of Dynamics, a whole long time ago, and looking at how I could create a safe ecosystem for some new users. And what that has become, though, is understanding with the growth of the different types of digital platforms, how we can leverage those in multiple different kinds of ways to more quickly deliver into production, and oftentimes with folks who might not be engineers, but in a safe environment.
Great, thanks, Tracy. Alex?
Great, Tracy. Thanks, Bill. I trace my beginning with low code, no code back to starting to discover the possibilities with Excel and Access very early on in my IT career, and I learned how to do data modeling in Microsoft Access, but I felt limited by the kind of distribution model for it in the local area network, and got my first job in software as a service, a very early startup, and we used Salesforce, and I kind of was blown away by what we could do with, we didn't even have the term software as a service yet or enterprise cloud, and was really amazed at the possibilities that opened up. And then as APIs started being published by Salesforce and other software as a service providers, and seeing how we could connect systems, and we could do that mostly with point and click configuration. Really excited about the possibilities. So started early on in the Salesforce ecosystem and been mostly immersed there, but really excited about the opportunities as more of these low code, no code, and software as a service platforms are expanding in the marketplace, and we're connecting the dots between them. It's really exciting to see, and I've found that it's unlocked a lot of career potential for me and so many other people. It's exciting to see people who come from very diverse backgrounds come into low code, no code, and I'm really passionate about military career transition, Salesforce military, and helping people with military backgrounds get into the ecosystem, and using low code, no code as kind of a zero entry pool for many of them to get into enterprise IT and start to learn, very beginning steps with building IT applications and then going deeper and deeper into enterprise IT architecture considerations. And so that's what I do now for mostly the Department of Veterans Affairs, but other agencies as well, with Liberty IT and Booz Allen Hamilton.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. Thanks. On a previous episode, we talked about policy as code, happened to be with Brian Lane from FDIC. I feel like on this episode, we're discussing security as code, moving an organization to a better security posture. Each security flaw is carefully identified and is fixed one at a time to close the most urgent security gaps. So DevSecOps identifies the most vulnerable concerns ahead of time and identifies how to avoid or move away from these bad positions. Code has to withstand criticism of others because, the reality is no code is flawless. Alex, is low code compatible with DevSecOps? Or to say it another way, is there any reason why building an application on a low code platform limits your ability to achieve, full DevSecOps objectives?
I think it's a great question, Bill, and something that we have to continuously evaluate as we're implementing these platforms. But we have a really strong and growing body of knowledge and techniques, particularly in the Salesforce platform, but I think on all these low-code, no-code platforms, that we are evaluating the constructs that we're building on these platforms. Even if it's point and click customization, we have standards and governance, and there's rules, and there's inspection that's taking place in those processes that we're building, the permissioning that we're doing for users, the access to data, the ability to operate and manipulate that data. So I think it's very compatible. It takes intentionality. It takes saying, hey, we need to evaluate this and have a pipeline that we go through, and that we have checkpoints and gates to make sure that we are maintaining least privilege and zero trust and identity. All those things are that every entry point to the system is properly protected, and that we are following all of these critical security principles, and that we are maintaining quality, and that we're testing everything that we're doing. So all of those things that you would do for any full stack application, you should do them for low code, no code. It might look a little different, might use different tools, but it's very compatible, I believe.
Tracy, thoughts?
Oh, you betcha. So I look at this. So first of all, I will say that I don't differentiate between DevOps and DevSecOps, but there's a reason for that. The reason that I'm willing to say DevSecOps is it's drawing people's attention towards the things that we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to have been designing and developing and delivering secure systems the entire time. It was never supposed to be something that was an afterthought. On the defense side, sometimes our approach to RMF and evaluations and ATOs caused security to be, a passing over the fence to the other team. So I bring that back in. So DevSecOps, right, is a host of different techniques. It's a lot of different capabilities. It's a bunch of different principles. All code, regardless as to whether it is compiled or whether it's configurations that are stored in a database, they all have to be high quality, all of them. And security is a facet of quality. It's an attribute of quality. So at the core of low code and no code is figuring out how we abstract away some of the more complex parts of the software engineering process and the delivery process. So when I speak about that, are they incongruent? No, absolutely not. If you have taken a step back and have defined what your cyber resiliency objectives are. What are you trying to do in the first place? If anybody, Bill, you've heard me say this a dozen times, don't ever come to me and say, I need to do DevOps or I need to do DevSecOps because my toes curl in a mean way and the little hair standing on my head, because that's not your goal. define your goal, and then look at the low code and the no code platforms that are on that wide continuum and do the architectural trade-off. It doesn't have to be a 6-month set of hardcore COAs. Take a step back and be responsible about what you're trying to accomplish. You will find some of the low code tools may not meet the specific objective of your mission context. Some of them will. And that's why I say it's not, will it all work? It's, well, unfortunately, I'm going to put on my consulting hat for a second. It depends, right? There's my Booz Allen statement, even though I'm not, there's an it depends that go with it, because it's not one thing. The pushback I would give to anybody who says, you can't have low code, no code, and have secure environments, and you can't have DevSecOps or apply those principles. Well, to that, I would say pusha. So yes, you can, if you take a step back, understand what your objectives are, and then be able to achieve those objectives measurably and demonstratively. To Alex's point earlier, you got to be able to demonstrate, how are you doing? How are you achieving those goals that are there?
Gotcha.
Over.
I appreciate it. So Alex, you mentioned the two words zero trust, or sometimes, I read baked in zero trust. I'm not sure everyone understands what's meant by that. Can you, from your point of view, what does zero trust mean, and how does it fit into DevSecOps?
Great question, Bill. And been learning a lot recently, and appreciate the thought leadership that's being published by a lot of folks right now in the community, and on the NIST event that was held a couple of weeks ago about zero trust and multi-cloud security. There was a lot of debate, and I really appreciated. I think it was Kelsey Hightower from Google was doing some demonstrations of how you implement zero trust, and there were some people saying, "Well, you're trusting, this authority or that authority." He said, "Well, it's not that that we're not doing implicit trust. We're not just saying, oh, because you're here, you can do these operations, you can do these things. We need to verify identity, and we need to not grant access to things implicitly. We need to have a reason for why we're granting access to do certain things." And for work that we do in Salesforce or other low-code, no-code platforms, when we're doing things, particularly for high assurance and public-facing systems that we're doing public sector work on, we have to change people's mindset about, you don't just enable certain operations just in case you need it. No, you enable things with intentionality and good reason, and you make sure that the person who can do that has been authenticated, and they're maintaining a secure connection to the system, that their identity is assured the entire way through the life cycle.
So Tracy.
Well, it's the opposite, right, of what we used to think of years ago when we would get a new server. We would have to go through and I've spent my time as an admin, right? I think I've told you I'm dev married to ops. I've spent my time over in the ops side doing the administration of the server and having to take away. And so things would come very open and we'd have to take away privileges. That's a problem, because in our architectures over the years, network, applications, environments, we wanted more performance. We wanted high user experience. And so what we did was we didn't tighten things down all of the time. ZTA, right? Zero trust architecture is turning the corner on that, which is doing the opposite. It's saying, I'm going to start by implicitly not trusting you. Not that you're a nefarious actor, but I'm not going to take for granted that I know your identity, that I know what your role is or what your location is, that the app that you're using is sanctioned. I'm not going to automatically say that that's sanctioned. I'm going to be looking at content, understanding your devices, all of those things. So when you bring zero trust and start to think about it in the context of low code and no code, we go back to defining what zero trust is for us, right? What does that mean for my organization and my entity, right? Context. And then what does the platform, the digital platform that I'm going to be leveraging, what does it offer to me? Some of the digital platforms, I can actually install it onto my own hardware, or I can install it whether cloud or not. Well, that affords me something different than if I am going with a SaaS provider and I literally just need to be concerned about working with the front end. So it becomes very difficult in that low code, no code can provide a tremendous amount of jump starts when it comes to zero trust, when it comes to security architecture. But it doesn't mean that you can ignore your cyber resilience. And that's one of the things that is being documented now is sometimes folks are letting their guard down a little bit because they're not thinking about that thing that they might not have the knowledge yet. They might not have the exposure yet. So we're still in that growing pains area when it comes to low code, no code. And I think that that's why some of the leaders in the government space have said, I'm not willing to deal with that, because I do think that they're worried about innocent breaches, absolute innocent breaches.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I think about, well, zero trust, one of the key aspects of it, as I've read, is, behavior detection. Most of the low code platforms come with a lot of capabilities out of the box, things like role-based access control, obviously, business process management and so on. And I know all low code platforms are not the same, but because you're working in a platform environment, does it possibly make it easier, I guess, Tracy, to follow on your last conversation, easier to implement some of these aspects of zero trust?
If I am in a pre-integrated environment where things have already been knitted together for me, turning on behavior detection, turning on AI, ML, predicting after I've learned about how Tracy's behaving, predicting how yes, it can be easier to turn it on. That having been said, and I'm sure Alex will jump on this, just turning it on isn't enough, right? And so what are you going to do with that information once you get it? And how do you discern when a behavior is actually a good behavior, right? False positives. Some interesting things that are going to be coming out in that area in the next year, I think.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it definitely, it can be information overload to an extent, when you turn those things on and people just get drowned in this,
right.
This volume of data that's pouring on them. And, you have to really have a plan for how you're going to inspect that and detect those patterns and then, act on what you see. So.
Right. Cognitive overload for operations is a real thing. It's tremendous. And some of the low codes and no codes do a great job. There are some additional add-ins that help down filter, what's going to be the highest predictable risk. So I think what we're going to see, what we're going to see in the next 12 to 18 months is more infusion of AI and ML, not simply to answer questions that we have about the end user's data, right? It's true that they were using AI ML for end user solving those problems, but across the entire SDLC. And that's where I think that some of the low code, no code platforms actually are a little bit ahead of some of the other digital platforms that don't have all of those pieces quite baked in yet, right? We're inserting that as part of our DevSecOps efforts.
So there's a term, that is growing, and that's software factory. And, typically within a low code platform, you get an authority to operate on the network in a government environment. And it makes it much easier to get an ATO for subsequent apps that are built on that platform because the platform is already accredited on the network and so on. How does that fit into this concept of a software factory? Thoughts on that?
I'll let Alex go. I have a lot of opinions, Bill.
Yeah, there's definitely, as with many things, pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages to the speed that affords. And there's countless examples of how that getting that platform enabled and being able to expand rapidly within that construct of the ATO and the boundaries within it can generate some security risks and a lot of technical debt and functional debt that makes it difficult to then implement security controls because those things are already in use. And so it really, I really appreciate the fact that we can move quickly and we can produce what the users, what the stakeholders need quickly with these low-code, no-code platforms. But we have to be very intentional and rigorous about making sure that we don't speed past the controls that need to be maintained so that we don't have breaches and loss, from that. Tracy, take it away.
Yeah, I think you'll love this. So software factory term is really, 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 really old. It's sort of like, folks come back wearing saddle shoes again, like the third generation is going to wear saddle shoes again. I was reading a report the other day, honest to goodness, it was from Rand Corporation, and I think it was from the mid 70s, and they were defining software factories and what the challenges are and what we think the opportunities could be. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do for all of this stuff is deliver value at the speed that's safe. Now, I don't mean at the speed for those who are risk adverse. I mean at the speed that is appropriate for the context. How I deliver embedded software that is part of surface combatant integrated weapon systems, probably going to be a little bit different than what I am doing if I am working on an HR case management area. And that's okay, as long as we are doing everything we can to do it quickly and securely. It all comes back to those principles and those practices. One of the things that we can do with low code, no code, I love the point that you made earlier, Alex, is helping to give folks who are, I call them blue collar. I learned this from my friend who works at IBM, blue collar, new collar workers as opposed to blue collars. So new collar means I didn't learn this in college. I didn't have this initial training. I am getting trained as I go, and I'm going to be introduced to this in very safe yet mentoring ways. So low code, no code does afford us opportunities to introduce those logical thinking skills, those deductive reasonings, how to decompose things, how to understand domain spaces. So from that perspective, if the original question was, well, can we achieve software factories with low code, no code, and have DevSecOps principles apply? You bet. I just hope that there's somebody, whether it's an Alex, a Bill, a Trace, I hope there's somebody who is more experienced, who's there in the trenches with them, mentoring along, is that's one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of interesting gaps. It's actually, there are so many smart folks, and it's the experienced middle that we're missing right now. We're just running out of people to be able to help folks who are newer in career as they're adopting all these really cool tools.
I appreciate it. So slightly different topic. One of the core aspects of DevSecOps is the ability to kind of break the application into layers, often, containers. Can one of you kind of explain why is that important? And is there anything in low code that, is not compatible with that?
Alex, do you want to take that, or you want me to jump on that?
Go ahead, Tracy, and I'll add on some thoughts.
So I would disagree that DevSecOps is about breaking things into layers and about putting them into containers. Containers are one tool in a huge arsenal. I don't use containers, for example, when I was talking about embedded systems earlier. We use DevSecOps to deliver software that should never go into a container. Now, it wouldn't be broken down into necessarily a layer. The goal is to make things as small as possible and to decouple them. So you want to get away from having things that are brittle. And so that's what DevOps and DevSecOps predicates on, is if I have something that's really small and it's decoupled, I can move it more quickly. I can test it more specifically. I don't have to go through the massive regression that I might have had to do before. That's why it's really important. Can containers play a part? Oh, you betcha. They are in the right context and the right choice. If I was building a web app, for example, oh yeah, I'm going to use containers to do that. If I am working with the back end and I'm deploying mobile apps, you betcha I'm going to use containers. In the AI and ML realm, if I am creating applications that are heavy on visualizations, yep, I think they are fantastic because I can make sure that what's in that container has all the dependencies that it's needed, and it's very, very atomic and essentially untouchable as it goes across the line. So low code, the question was kind of, is low code compatible with containerizing? Uh-oh, yes, I'm going to say it. Depends on the platform. If you were looking at Red Hat's OpenShift, if you called that a low-code platform, well, they're perfectly suited for containers. So you can adopt their containers. They have a smorgasbord of containers. There are others that are less so, that are more configuration-based, where I truly am using the WYSIWYG on the front side. I don't know about containers. I don't see containers, right? And so it's kind of dependent upon what you're trying to accomplish with it and how much you want to delegate out. So I'll turn that over to you, Alex. I think, you know, when you're working in the Salesforce space, it's a mixed bag when it comes to working with containers.
Yeah, and I think maybe if we could change the term to packaging or encapsulation of the functionality. And it's, you know, it's something that Salesforce has been on a journey with, and we're there's more that we want to see them do to facilitate how we package applications, how we manage dependencies, how we are able to move applications around and maybe split them up into, you know, what you might look at as a microservice. Perhaps it's not really technically a microservice, but, you know, we're trying to componentize things into discrete elements that we can move around separately and separate those dependencies. And like you said, you know, have less monoliths in our platform. So that, yeah, I think that, you know, once again, it depends on the maturity of the platform and how you approach it. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think many of these things are somewhat abstract or arbitrary boundaries that we draw around things, whether they may be expressed in a more definitive way in a container or in a package or in a file, or, you know, whatever that boundary is that contains those things. We could even look at it, and we find some creative ways to do things in a platform that doesn't give us a explicit package or container to put things in. Ways, their naming conventions, and just how we group things together, you know, kind of becomes a logical container for it. And so if you think about it in that way, it makes it more manageable. Yep. And so when you have that mindset, low code, no code, you can do it that way. And it makes, you know, the cost of ownership lower because you are making things as modular as possible with whatever platform you have.
Well, it becomes very important to your point. If we strip away the word containerization and talk about it in terms of packaging and modularity and componentization, when you are leveraging a platform in an enterprise and you have multiple different teams, it does become important for there to be some coordination of sorts, because folks will build identical feature sets not realizing because they need it. So I need this, I don't know, I'm going to make it up. I need this basic login. Now I know we have all kinds of logins, but I'm just making it up for the example. So I'll create my login, and this is going to work with my stuff over here. And the next line of business or the next funding stream creates theirs, and the third creates theirs, or zip codes or special calculations. Like if I think about the IRS and tax calculations, they have different tax calculators. How do I make those things? And so if multiple people are doing the same thing, there are opportunities for goodness to come together and say, okay, I know we all have done this, but let's think about refactoring it. And we could either make it a component that's on top of the platform, or depending on that digital platform, it might become something that you work with your vendor or you work with your organization that becomes part of the core platform because it is such a cross-cutting need. So there's some tremendous things that you can do with componentization, with modularity in specific when you're using these different types of tools.
So we're all familiar with, I guess, more traditional software update schedules. Once a year, I get a major new release. More recently, we talk about continuous integration and deployment, continuous evolution, continuous ATO. How does DevSecOps maybe and low code as well help facilitate that? What are your thoughts on speeding up the release schedule of getting enhancements out to the field?
That buzzword, continuous. Inigo Montoya comes to my mind right now. That word you say, I do not think it means what you think it does.
Please explain.
So continuous is defined in your context, right? I could say, Bill, do you exercise all the time? You'll say, yeah, I exercise continuously. And for you, that means that you go out for a walk on Sunday morning, and then Wednesday you go to get the paper, and on Friday afternoon you go for coffee. That to you is continuous. For Alex, he may be a hardcore runner, and he may be out there, walking day in and day out and day in and day out. So I say that because that's a first part of the context, right? Continuous is, again, to your context. When you think about it, the continuous, you kind of have to look at it from two perspectives. There's the time to create and test and update. There's also the speed at which organizations that are leveraging those updates can actually adopt them. So one of the things that we are seeing in some places, especially on the non-defense side of the house, I call it the public sector civilian side, is as they are getting more proficient at making changes, they are often running ahead of the ability of organizations to even consume those changes. Even if they're trying to take an app store mentality and do it in small sound bites, they're actually running ahead. So continuous DevSecOps capabilities, being able to have the authority to operate, understanding the security model, the whole way down to the infrastructure. All of those things are that first step that allow me to choose the pace so that I can move things across from idea to feedback as often as the organization can tolerate. So yeah, it will facilitate that, because I can't test in quality, but I can test that I have not broken the security and the quality.
Yeah, I love how the industry is, coming up with these terms and popularizing them, and we kind of spread them across all these things. And I'm like, oh, cool. We finally have a term for something that we've been doing for a long time, and it helps people think about it more, consciously perhaps. But I did a presentation a long time ago about how, you do continuous integration, continuous delivery on a platform like Salesforce. And, these software as a service providers, they have to be up. They can't be down to upgrade for hours or days. So, they are your continuous platform. And, the meme about, I only make changes in production. I'm messing it up, but, I'm talking about I don't often make changes, but when I do it in production. In the Salesforce's low code, no code world, we've had to kind of, teach ourselves not to make changes in production because it was so easy, and you're just, manipulating things that are already in memory or in the database of the software service provider that is providing a low code, no code platform, or perhaps if you're now hosting one internally. So, I think now that it's possible to do that, and you can reconfigure an application while it's running, and it doesn't break anything for anybody, from a system level standpoint. Then you have to then bring those engineering disciplines in to think about, okay, well, I have just changed the functionality. What is the downstream impact on my users, and how do I test, and how do I communicate those changes? And it's much more so about a change management approach to it. And you can have, classic CI/CD, for various low code, no code platforms, where the changes you make and it propagates those out and you test and everything. So it many of them are compatible with it. But really, how are you managing the speed of change that it facilitates, having those platforms, in your production systems that your users are actively using?
I think I think Bill has a pretty difficult job in shepherding a podcast about low code, no code, because it's a damn universe, right? It really is. It's not as though there are cloud providers who do everything for you, and because they have the ability to have to duplicate, triplicate, quadruplicate, right, environments, spin up and equally apply those changes, validate and test them, make, essentially unknown to you, be able to make those changes, is different than some of the other platforms where you own more of the stack, or you own more of what's going on within that world. So you're right, especially when I think about how Salesforce really does a good job of managing the cloud underneath it. So y'all don't have to worry about that piece part.
We touched on Agile before. I've always thought, at least reading the latest stuff on DevSecOps and so on, DevSecOps requires Agile. Am I wrong in that assumption? It sounds like I am, Tracy.
Oh gosh, this becomes a theological debate. So the core tenets of DevSecOps is rapid feedback, right? Rapid delivery, rapid feedback, and the best way to get rapid feedback is using Agile capabilities to do it. Can I apply the tenets of DevSecOps to something that is more monolithic? Yep. Can I do it with waterfall? I did CI/CD 15 years ago, and it was waterfall. And we essentially, I didn't realize it at the time, we were kind of agile when we were in maintenance or in sustainment, because that's where we had bug fixes and things that were being applied that were smaller and more granular. Does it require it? Not exactly. Is it best together? Oh, you betcha. You absolutely betcha.
Gotcha.
I agree. It's they don't need to go together, but they really do go well together. And it keeps coming back to your mindset, your approach, your principles for how you design and build systems, whether using low code, no code, or a full stack traditional software development platform. If you want to be responsive to your users' needs, to the needs of the environment that you're operating in, you need to understand both of these frameworks that are continuing to evolve, and it's going to look different in every scenario. You have to allow for variation. You can't say, oh, here is the Agile framework that we use, or here is the DevSecOps framework that we, this is the only standard. No, you're going to have to adjust it for every situation, every scenario.
Just dictate the use of SAFe no matter what, dictate that it's Scrum no matter what, dictate the tool stack down to the nth level. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. It's, you guys have seen it. You guys have seen it. It gets messy times 10. So.
All right, my last question here, we'll kind of wrap things up, but I guess, given the microservices nature of kind of modern cloud apps and applying DevSecOps to building modern cloud apps, does that make it easier for applications to scale at an enterprise level? What's the relationship between DevSecOps and scalability and the cloud? It's kind of a broad question.
So if we're saying that DevSecOps requires microservices, well, I would say no, they don't require microservices. If we stop talking about DevSecOps for just a second and talk about microservices pattern, the microservices pattern in particular is so amazingly helpful with cloud because those services, microservices, are atomic. And they are stateless, usually, so that I can start up as many as I need to. So I only needed 5 of them this morning when everybody was coming in and getting their coffee. But now there are tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users. I have to provide more and more and more of them. So can they be helpful? You betcha. It becomes complex for the development teams when there are many, many, many microservices, because it is difficult to get your arms around all of those little widgets. So instead of having a couple of bigger Duplos, now I've got those tiny little Legos that have one dot on them. And so it actually can become more difficult. Now, it's a trade-off. It's absolutely a trade-off what you're going to be doing inside your enterprise. So yes, microservices can help. Manage them very specifically so you don't get overwhelmed by them. Use those DevSecOps principles, like having a small package, like Alex called it, a small package that we're able to move forward. Yeah, then it is going to make it easier in general for your enterprise to be able to scale.
Alex, any final thoughts?
Certainly, it's about finding the right balance for the environment you're in, and not overwhelming your team or your teams with too many things. You can certainly over optimize, you can over abstract, you can over engineer things, and in thinking that will help you scale, when in reality it's going to impede you, it's going to create too much overhead. So you need to say, hey, we need to have a lean objective and get to that objective, and then we can figure out how do we extend this to scale it further. And scaling, people say scale, and sometimes they mean like leaping, over tall buildings, when instead of actually ramping things up. So doing that in a thoughtful way is really important to achieve enterprise scale, whatever that means. For some people that may mean 100 users, some people may mean 100,000 or 100 million users. It's all over the spectrum. So it is really exciting to see how the encapsulation and the componentization of things is enabling so just incredible scale and proliferation of tools and capabilities. And it just requires constant iteration, constant evaluation, and conversation to figure out, hey, how do we optimize this for all these different?
Are you saying continuous diligence? What? Continuous
yes,
something? Yeah,
I like that. Yeah,
we need a continuous something. Continuous something there. Yeah. So.
Good stuff. All right, Alex, Tracy, I want to thank you both for your time and your insight today. Until next month, when we have another conversation with a government trailblazer on the use of low code in government. My name is Bill Bunce. Thank you.